Mother Bear storms into a grocery store. The manager's baby made her kneel in silence. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The small town of Pine Hollow nestled against the edge of vast wilderness, where civilization and nature lived in an uneasy truce. Oak Ridge. Grocery stood at this boundary, its brick walls and wide windows facing both the town's main street and the dark pines that stretched beyond the parking lot. Inside, Oliver Reed arranged jars of local honey on a shelf, the afternoon sun painting golden rectangles across the worn wooden floor. Behind the counter, his 11-month-old daughter Lily sat in her portable high chair, babbling happily and shaking a wooden rattle. Her mother had fallen ill that morning, leaving Oliver no choice but to bring Lily to work. Mrs. Finch, a silver-haired regular who always smelled of lavender, leaned over the counter and tickled Lily's chubby cheek. "She's getting so big, Oliver," Mrs. Finch said, gathering her paper bags. "Those eyes of hers, they see right through you, don't they? Like she knows something we don't." Oliver nodded, glancing at his daughter's bright blue eyes that seemed too wise for her tiny face. "Sometimes I think she understands more than I do," he admitted, straightening Lily's yellow sunflower dress. Outside, dark clouds gathered above the forest, promising an early autumn storm. The wind picked up, rattling the glass doors and sending leaves skittering across the parking lot. Inside, shoppers moved through narrow aisles, their conversations creating a gentle hum that mingled with the soft music playing through crackling speakers. In the forest beyond, among damp pines and rotting logs, a mother bear pawed desperately at a fallen tree trunk. Her cub whimpered nearby, his dark eyes wide with hunger and fear. They had traveled farther than usual, driven by the scarcity of berries after an unusually dry summer. The mother bear's ribs showed beneath her matted fur, her powerful body weakened by weeks of insufficient food. Back in the store, Lily dropped her rattle, its wooden clack drawing Oliver's attention. He bent to retrieve it, just as the automatic doors slid open with a whoosh of cool air. There was no greeting, no footsteps, only a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor tiles. Oliver froze, the rattle clutched in his trembling hand. At the entrance stood a massive brown bear, her fur wet from the drizzle that had begun outside. Behind her, a small cub poked its head in cautiously. The mother bear's eyes, dark and wild, scanned the store, nostrils flaring at the overwhelming sense of food and humans. A woman in the produce section screamed, dropping her basket of apples. The fruit rolled across the floor, coming to rest at the bear's massive paws. The sound triggered a wave of panic. Shoppers abandoned carts, scrambling for the back exits or freezing in place, hoping to become invisible to the predator that had invaded their safe space. Lily, oblivious to the danger, squealed with delight at the sight of the bear, reaching out her tiny hands as if to touch the fearsome creature. Oliver's heart pounded against his ribs as he slowly straightened, careful not to make any sudden movements. His daughter sat directly in the bear's line of sight, completely exposed on her high perch. The mother bear took a heavy step forward, claws clicking against the tiles. She roared, a sound so primal and powerful that it shook the jars on the shelves. The cub darted inside, knocking over a display of cereal boxes before scurrying behind a freezer unit, separated from its mother. Oliver's mind raced with terrible possibilities. He stood 10 feet from Lily, with the bear directly between them. Any attempt to reach his daughter might provoke an attack. The store phone hung on the wall behind the counter, too far to call for help. The bear took another step, then another, moving deeper into the store, her massive head swinging from side to side as she searched for her cub. Lily laughed again, dropping her rattle. The wooden toy hit the floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the now silent store. The mother bear's head snapped toward the sound, her small ears pivoting forward. She locked eyes with the baby, who stared back without fear, with nothing but pure fascination in her innocent gaze. What happened next would change Pine Hollow forever. The mother bear's guttural growl vibrated through the store as she took another heavy step toward Lily. Oliver felt his body tense, ready to lunge forward despite the certain danger. His mind flashed to the hunting rifle his father had taught him to use. Locked uselessly in his cabin 5 miles away, he caught movement from the corner of his eye. Frank Thornton, the elderly butcher, was inching his hand toward the meat cleaver hanging on the wall behind the deli counter. "Don't," Oliver mouthed silently, shaking his head almost imperceptibly. Any sudden movement might trigger the bear's predatory instincts. Frank's weathered hand paused, trembling, then dropped back to his side. The bear rose onto her hind legs, towering nearly 8 feet tall, her massive head nearly brushing the fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. Her breath came in heavy pants, fog forming in the air-conditioned space. Lily's eyes widened with wonder rather than fear, her tiny hands opening and closing as if trying to grasp this magnificent creature that had entered her world. "Sweet Jesus," whispered Mrs. Finch from where she crouched behind a display of canned soup. "That baby doesn't know to be afraid." The bear dropped back to all fours with a thud that rattled the shelves. She sniffed the air, catching the scent of her cub, who remained hidden behind the freezer, whimpering softly. Oliver's pulse thundered in his ears as he calculated the distance between himself and Lily. 12 feet of open space with no cover, no way to reach her without crossing directly into the bear's path. From the back of the store came the sound of a door closing too loudly. Someone had escaped through the loading dock. The sharp noise startled the cub, who darted from his hiding place in panic, scrambling across the slick tiles toward a pyramid of apple cider bottles. The display toppled with a deafening crash of glass and liquid, sending the cub skidding into a shelf of bread. The mother bear roared in response, spinning toward the sound. For one precious moment, her massive body turned away from Lily. Oliver saw his chance. He lunged forward, arms outstretched toward his daughter. But his foot caught the edge of a fallen cereal box. He stumbled, crashing into a rack of chips with a cacophony of crinkling packages. The bear whirled back, now caught between her crying cub and the human threat. Her lips pulled back to reveal the yellowed teeth the length of Oliver's fingers. "No, no, no," he whispered, frozen in place, still 6 feet from Lily. The bear charged, covering the distance between them in a heartbeat. Oliver closed his eyes, bracing for teeth and claws, for pain beyond imagining. He heard screams, a child crying, not Lily, but the young son of the town librarian who had been hiding behind the customer service desk. But the impact never came. Oliver opened his eyes to find the bear standing motionless before him, her hot breath washing over his face, close enough that he could see the gray hairs peppered through the brown around her muzzle. She was looking past him, her attention captured by something behind Oliver. A soft tune filled the terrified silence. Lily had found the musical toy that Mrs. Jenkins, the cashier, kept beneath the counter to entertain children. The simple melody of "You Are My Sunshine" tinkled through the tense air. The bear's ears twitched, her massive head tilting slightly as if puzzled by the gentle sound. "Bah!" Lily called out happily, bouncing in her seat as she pressed the toy's buttons. The cub, still frightened but curious, poked his head around the end of the aisle, responding to the baby's sounds with a soft whine. The mother bear's attention shifted between her cub and Lily. her aggressive stance softening almost imperceptibly. Oliver held his breath, afraid to move, to speak, to do anything that might break whatever strange spell had fallen over the scene. Then came the store's back door opening again, this time with the unmistakable sound of boots, multiple pairs. Voices called out, "Sheriff's Department!" Everyone, stay calm. The mother bear tensed, hackles rising along her spine. The cub darted back to his mother, pressing against her thick legs. Oliver saw the future unfold in horrifying clarity. Startled officers, gunshots, blood on the pristine white tiles. "Wait!" he called out, his voice cracking with desperation. "Don't come in! There's a child, my daughter." His words tumbled out too fast, too frantic to make sense. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Lily, as if sensing the tension, let the music toy drop silent. Instead, she reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a partially squashed strawberry, the last of her afternoon snack that Oliver had forgotten to put away. The ripe fruit glistened in her tiny palm as she extended her arm toward the bears, offering her treasure with innocent generosity. The mother bear's nostrils flared, catching the sweet scent. Her massive head lowered, eyes fixed on the small red offering. The store fell into absolute silence, even the approaching officers pausing at the loading dock door, sensing that something extraordinary was transpiring. Oliver watched, heart in his throat, as the mother bear took a cautious step toward his daughter, then another. Mrs. Finch began to pray quietly, her whispered words a barely audible undercurrent to the tableau unfolding before them. Frank gripped the edge of the deli counter so hard his knuckles showed white beneath papery skin. The bear reached Lily's high chair, her enormous head level with the baby's tiny body. One swipe of her paw could end everything Oliver loved in this world. He felt his legs weakening, threatening to buckle beneath him. Lily giggled, completely fearless, and thrust the strawberry forward until it touched the bear's black nose. And then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, the massive predator delicately, almost tenderly, took the offered fruit between her lips, careful not to graze the baby's fingers with her teeth. As the bear chewed, something remarkable happened. She lowered herself to the ground, her front legs folding beneath her in a gesture so deliberate it appeared almost ceremonial. The cub approached cautiously, sniffing at Lily's dangling feet with obvious curiosity. From the back of the store came Sheriff Donovan's distinctive voice, pitched low but clear. "Nobody move. Not a muscle." Oliver couldn't have moved if he wanted to, transfixed by the sight of his daughter reaching down to pat the mother bear's broad head, her tiny fingers disappearing into the thick fur. The bear's eyes, which had burned with wild fury moments before, now appeared almost peaceful, watchful but no longer threatening. What invisible understanding had passed between the wild creature and the human child? Oliver would never know, but in that moment he witnessed something that defied everything he thought he knew about the natural world. The spell was broken by a sudden crash from outside. A clap of thunder so powerful it rattled the windows. The bear rose quickly but without aggression, nudging her cub toward the exit. She paused at the automatic doors, looking back at Lily one last time, as if memorizing the child who had shown no fear. Then they were gone, vanishing into the curtain of rain that had begun to fall, leaving behind only wet paw prints on the white tiles, and a story that no one in Pine Hollow would ever fully believe. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. The moment the bears disappeared into the storm, the store erupted in chaos. Sheriff Donovan and his 2 deputies rushed forward, weapons drawn but pointed safely toward the ground. Shoppers emerged from hiding places, their voices rising in a cacophony of shock and disbelief. Mrs. Jenkins fainted behind the counter, slumping to the floor with a soft thud that went largely unnoticed in the commotion. Oliver didn't hear any of it. The world had narrowed to the 12 feet between himself and Lily, a distance he now covered in 3 desperate strides. His hands trembled violently as he unlatched the high chair's safety belt, gathering his daughter against his chest. Her small body felt impossibly fragile, miraculous in its wholeness. "Is she hurt? Oliver, is she okay?" Sheriff Donovan's gruff voice penetrated the fog of Oliver's relief. The older man's weathered face appeared beside them, eyes scanning Lily for any sign of injury. "She's fine," Oliver managed, his voice cracking. "She's completely fine." He pulled back slightly to look at his daughter's face, half expecting to find her traumatized by the encounter. Instead, Lily beamed at him, her blue eyes bright with excitement, babbling happily as if she'd just experienced a delightful game rather than a brush with death. "I've never—" Sheriff Donovan shook his head, holstering his weapon. "In 30 years wearing this badge, I've never seen anything like that. Bears don't act that way, Oliver. They just don't." Oliver nodded numbly, unable to form a coherent response. His knees finally gave way, and he sank into the chair Mrs. Finch quickly pushed behind him, still clutching Lily to his chest. Dr. Eleanor Walsh, the town veterinarian who had been buying cat food when the bears entered, knelt beside them. Her practiced hands gently examined Lily, checking for injuries that might have escaped Oliver's notice. "Not a scratch," she confirmed, her voice tinged with wonder. "Though I'd like to take a look at your arm, Oliver." He glanced down, surprised to discover 3 parallel tears in his flannel shirt, the fabric darkening with blood. In his desperate lunge toward Lily, he must have brushed against the bear's claws without even feeling it. The adrenaline was wearing off now, and the wounds began to sting fiercely. "I need to get my kit from the car, Doctor," Walsh said, rising. "Those should be cleaned properly." "I'm calling Animal Control," announced Deputy Parker, already dialing on his cell phone. "Those bears can't be running around town. They're clearly dangerous." "No!" The force of Oliver's objection startled everyone, including himself. He took a breath, trying to steady his voice. They weren't aggressive, not really. They were scared, hungry maybe. If they'd wanted to hurt anyone, His voice caught as he looked down at Lily, the horrible possibility still too raw to articulate. Sheriff Donovan studied him for a long moment. "They caused property damage and terrorized half the town, Oliver. Protocol says—" "Protocol be damned," interrupted Frank from behind the deli counter. The old butcher rarely spoke above a murmur, and his forceful tone drew every eye in the store. "I've lived in these mountains for 78 years. What we just saw wasn't natural, but it wasn't threatening either. That bear, she showed restraint, respect even." A murmur of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Mrs. Finch nodded vigorously, still clutching her rosary beads. It was a miracle, plain and simple. "That child," she gestured to Lily, "has been touched by grace." Sheriff Donovan sighed heavily, the weight of responsibility evident in the slump of his shoulders. "We still need to report this. But," he added, seeing Oliver's expression darken, "I'll make it clear the bears were non-aggressive and retreated on their own." Oliver nodded gratefully, wincing as Dr. Walsh returned and began cleaning his wounds. The scratches were superficial but would leave scars, physical reminders of a day that had already marked him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. As the initial shock subsided, customers began tentatively cleaning up the mess, righting toppled displays and sweeping broken glass. The normalcy of these actions seemed surreal after what they'd witnessed. Oliver watched them through a strange emotional distance, as if viewing a scene from someone else's life. "You should get home," Sheriff Donovan said quietly. "Get some rest. We'll need a statement from you tomorrow, but it can wait." Oliver nodded again, finding it difficult to form words. He rose shakily, still holding Lily, who had begun to grow drowsy against his shoulder, the excitement finally taking its toll on her small body. As they moved toward the exit, the automatic doors slid open to reveal a crowd gathered in the parking lot. Word had spread quickly through Pine Hollow, a town where news traveled faster than the mountain wind. Faces peered in anxiously, a buzz of questions rising as Oliver appeared in the doorway. "Give them space," Sheriff Donovan commanded, moving ahead to clear a path to Oliver's truck. Among the crowd stood Nancy Chen, editor of the Pine Hollow Gazette, her press badge glinting in the stormy light as she raised her camera. Oliver turned away, shielding Lily from the flash. The last thing he wanted was his daughter's face splashed across the front page, her story dissected by people who hadn't been there, who couldn't possibly understand what had transpired. The rain had eased to a gentle patter, leaving the air fresh and clean. As Sheriff Donovan helped them into the truck, Oliver caught a glimpse of movement at the forest's edge, a dark shape melting into the deeper shadows beneath the pines. Though it was surely his imagination, he could have sworn the shape paused, looking back at them before disappearing into the wilderness. The drive home passed in a blur, the familiar road suddenly strange and threatening with each shadowy form of tree or boulder. Oliver found himself jumping at every movement in his peripheral vision, his body still keyed to a level of alertness that made his muscles ache. Their cabin stood alone on the eastern ridge, closer to the forest than most in Pine Hollow dared to build. Oliver's grandfather had constructed it in 1946, after returning from the war with a desire for solitude and the whisper of pine needles rather than the clamor of people. Usually, Oliver found comfort in the isolation. Tonight, every creak of the wooden porch, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through him. He carried Lily inside, moving through the familiar rooms with mechanical efficiency. Bath, pajamas, bottle. The routine anchored him as he struggled to process the day's events. Lily, already half asleep, offered no resistance to being tucked into her crib. Her eyelids fluttered closed as Oliver stroked her fine hair, marveling at the miracle of her existence, a miracle that could have been snatched away in an instant. Only when her breathing deepened into the peaceful rhythm of sleep did Oliver allow himself to sink into the rocking chair beside her crib. His bandaged arm throbbed dully, a counterpoint to the sharper pain in his chest, where fear still gripped his heart. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs as the day's terror finally found release. He must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, he was jolted awake by the sound of scratching at the cabin's front door. Not the casual brush of a branch in the wind, but deliberate, purposeful. Oliver froze, every muscle tensing. It was after midnight. The forest around them was pitch black, the moon hidden behind lingering storm clouds. No neighbor would come calling at this hour. The scratching came again, followed by a low, rumbling sound that sent ice through his veins. Carefully, moving as silently as possible, Oliver eased himself out of the rocking chair. He crossed to the hunting rifle mounted above Lily's bedroom door, his fingers closing around the smooth wood of the stock with grim determination. Whatever waited outside, bear or worse, would not cross his threshold. The floorboards betrayed him with a creak as he moved into the hallway. The scratching stopped abruptly. Oliver held his breath, counting the seconds that stretched into a full minute of silence. Had the visitor departed, or was it simply waiting, listening as intently as he was? He moved to the living room window, keeping to the shadows. Peering through a gap in the curtains, he could make out the porch illuminated faintly by the security light that had triggered automatically. Nothing moved in the yellow glow. Perhaps he'd imagined it, his traumatized mind conjuring threats from ordinary night sounds. Oliver lowered the rifle slightly, exhaling slowly. Then the security light caught something. A gleam of light reflected in a pair of eyes at the edge of the porch. Not at standing height, but low to the ground. Too small for the mother bear. The cub. It sat alone at the bottom of the porch steps, its small form barely visible in the darkness. As Oliver watched, it pawed at the lowest step, then looked up at the door with an almost expectant air. Where was its mother? Bears were fiercely protective. A mother would never willingly abandon her cub. Oliver scanned the yard, the tree line, expecting to see the massive shape of the adult bear emerging from the shadows. Nothing moved. The cub whined softly, a sound so plaintive it pierced through Oliver's fear. Something was wrong. He set the rifle aside, against his better judgment, and moved to the door. Pressing his ear against the wood, he listened for any sound that might reveal the mother bear's presence. Only the cub's occasional whimper broke the night's silence. Oliver's mind raced. If the mother bear was injured or dead, the cub wouldn't survive long alone. Mountain lions, wolves, even other bears would make short work of an unprotected youngster. Yet approaching a wild bear, even a cub, was madness. He thought of Lily, sleeping peacefully just rooms away. The memory of the mother bear's gentle acceptance of his daughter's offering surfaced in his mind. There had been intelligence in those dark eyes, an awareness that seemed to transcend the usual boundaries between human and animal. Before he could reconsider, Oliver flipped on the porch light and cracked open the door, just enough to see the cub clearly, but not enough to allow it entry if it charged. The small bear looked up, startled by the sudden light. It backed away a few steps, then surprised Oliver by sitting back on its haunches and regarding him with what could only be described as expectation. That's when Oliver noticed the dark stains matting the fur around the cub's right front paw and shoulder. Blood, not the cub's own. There was too much of it, splashed across its coat like a grotesque painting. "Oh, God," Oliver whispered, realization dawning. "Your mother. She's hurt, isn't she?" The cub tilted its head, as if considering his words. Then it rose, limping slightly down the porch steps before stopping to look back at him. When Oliver didn't move, it returned, repeating the performance with greater urgency, adding a soft moan that raised the hair on the back of his neck. It wanted him to follow. Every survival instinct Oliver possessed screamed against the notion. Following a bear cub into the dark forest was a death wish, especially if it led to an injured and likely aggressive mother bear. He should close the door, call animal control, and let professionals handle the situation in daylight. Yet he found himself reaching for his jacket for the flashlight kept by the door. The image of the mother bear kneeling before Lily, showing a gentleness that defied explanation, wouldn't leave his mind. He owed her something. This creature who had spared his child when she could have destroyed his entire world with a single swipe of her paw. Oliver glanced at the baby monitor on the side table, confirming the steady sound of Lily's breathing. The storm had passed. The night was clear and still. The nearest neighbor, old Hank Williams, no relation to the singer, as he was fond of pointing out, was just half a mile down the road. Oliver made his decision. He scribbled a quick note and left it on the kitchen table in case the unthinkable happened and someone else found Lily alone. Then he stepped onto the porch, flashlight in one hand, cell phone in the other, its screen showing Hank's number ready to dial with a single swipe. The cub watched him descend the steps, its small body tense with what seemed like relief. As soon as Oliver's boots touched the gravel path, it turned and began moving toward the tree line, looking back every few steps to ensure he followed. "I must be out of my mind," Oliver muttered, shining his flashlight ahead as he followed the bear cub into the waiting darkness of the forest. Behind him, the cabin stood silent, its windows glowing softly with the light he'd left on. Inside, Lily slept peacefully, unaware that her father had just crossed a threshold from which there might be no return. The forest closed around Oliver like a living entity, branches reaching for him in the darkness beyond his flashlight's beam. The night air carried the scent of damp earth and pine, along with something sharper, metallic, blood. The cub moved with surprising speed despite its limping gait, following a path invisible to human eyes but clearly familiar to its own. Oliver stumbled over exposed roots and hidden rocks, his breath coming in ragged gasps that had more to do with fear than exertion. Every shadow concealed potential threats. Every sound, the hoot of an owl, the sudden scurry of a nocturnal creature, sent his heart racing. Yet he continued forward, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't explain even to himself. They had traveled perhaps half a mile when the cub paused at the edge of a small clearing. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating a scene that stopped Oliver in his tracks. The mother bear lay on her side near a fallen log, her massive body unnaturally still. Even in the dim light, Oliver could see the dark stain spreading beneath her, saturating the carpet of pine needles. The cub approached its mother, nudging her muzzle with a soft whine. When she didn't respond, it turned to Oliver with an expression so mournful it momentarily stripped away the animal's wildness, revealing something universal in its grief. Oliver edged closer, flashlight trained on the mother bear. She was alive. He could see the shallow rise and fall of her ribcage, but barely. A gaping wound tore across her left flank, exposing muscle and tissue to the night air. Even with his limited medical knowledge, Oliver recognized the distinctive pattern of a bullet wound. Someone had shot her after she left the grocery store. Anger flared hot in his chest. Despite the damage the bears had caused, despite the fear they'd inspired, they had harmed no one. The mother bear had shown restraint, even gentleness. This shooting hadn't been self-defense. It had been vengeance, or sport. The cub paced anxiously between Oliver and its mother, clearly expecting him to do something. But what could he do? He wasn't a veterinarian. He had no medical supplies, no way to move a creature that must weigh at least 400 pounds. Oliver pulled out his phone, relieved to see he still had signal, weak but present. His finger hovered over the screen. Calling the authorities would ensure the bear received care, but it would also mean capture for both mother and cub. They would be relocated at best, euthanized at worst if the mother was deemed too habituated to humans after today's incident. As he hesitated, the mother bear's eyes fluttered open, dark pupils fixed on him, showing neither fear nor aggression. Only a deep exhaustion and something that looked unsettlingly like resignation. She made a soft, chuffing sound, almost like a sigh. The cub responded immediately, pressing close to its mother's head, licking her muzzle with frantic affection. The mother bear made no move to rise, but one massive paw shifted slightly, as if trying to reach for her child. In that moment, Oliver saw not a wild animal, but a mother desperate to protect her child. A mirror of his own primal need to safeguard Lily. The recognition struck him with physical force, driving the air from his lungs. He made his decision. Scrolling through his contacts, he found Dr. Walsh's number. The veterinarian had given it to him years ago, when he'd found an injured hawk on his property. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Eleanor," he said without preamble, It's Oliver Reed. I need your help. I found the bear from the store. She's been shot. A pause then. Oliver, you need to get away from there right now. A wounded bear is the most dangerous. She won't hurt me, he interrupted, surprising himself with his certainty. But she'll die without help. Please, Eleanor, she spared my daughter. Another, longer pause. He could almost hear Doctor Walsh weighing professional protocol against the extraordinary events she'd witnessed earlier that day. "Where are you?" she finally asked, resignation clear in her voice. Oliver described his location as best he could, mentioning landmarks that Eleanor might recognize from her own walks through these woods. "Stay at a safe distance," she instructed. "I'll bring what I can, but Oliver, no promises. A wound like that in the field. I understand. Just hurry." He ended the call and sank down onto a fallen log about 20 feet from the bears, close enough to keep watch but far enough to give the mother space if she decided his presence was unwelcome. The cub, apparently satisfied that Oliver had done his part, curled up against its mother's neck, occasionally making soft sounds of distress when she breathed particularly shallowly. Time stretched endlessly in the quiet forest. Oliver found himself talking softly, not to the bears, but to the night itself. He told the darkness about Lily's birth during the worst blizzard in Pine Hollow's recorded history, about her first smile, first word. He spoke of his late wife, Catherine, who had died of a sudden aneurysm when Lily was just 3 months old, leaving him adrift in grief and the overwhelming responsibility of raising their daughter alone. "I thought I knew what fear was when the doctors told me Catherine was gone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But today, when I saw you near my daughter, that was true fear." The mother bear's eyes remained closed, but her ears twitched slightly at the sound of his voice. The cub had fallen asleep, its small body rising and falling with each breath. "She wasn't afraid of you," Oliver continued, "not for a second. Children see things differently, I suppose. She offered you food without hesitation, like you were just another hungry creature, not something to fear." He laughed softly without humor. Maybe she was right. A twig snapped somewhere behind him, and Oliver turned to see the beam of a flashlight weaving through the trees. Dr. Walsh emerged into the clearing, her silver hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, wearing jeans and a heavy coat thrown over what appeared to be pajamas. She carried a large backpack that clanked softly with each step. She froze when she saw the bears, her professional composure momentarily cracking. "Good Lord," she breathed. "I've never been this close to a wild bear without a tranquilizer gun or a very sturdy fence." "She's too weak to be dangerous," Oliver said, rising to help with the backpack. "And the cub seems to trust me, strangely enough." Eleanor shook her head in disbelief, but approached cautiously, medical training overriding natural caution. She stopped several feet from the injured bear, assessing the situation. "Gunshot wound," she confirmed grimly. "Hunting rifle, from the size of it. Not immediately fatal, but the blood loss." She knelt, opening her backpack to reveal an assortment of medical supplies. "I can clean and dress it, give her antibiotics and something for the pain, but she needs surgery to remove bullet fragments and repair the damage. Without that ... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Oliver understood the prognosis was grim. What would happen if you called this in? "Officially?" Eleanor sighed, pulling on latex gloves. Game and Wildlife would tranquilize her, transport her to the nearest facility equipped for large predators, probably the Wildlife Center in Rock Point. They'd treat her, but afterward? These bears entered a populated area, Oliver, caused a panic. Protocol would classify them as dangers to the public. They'd kill them. It wasn't a question. They'd use the term humane euthanasia, Eleanor corrected softly, but yes, or permanent captivity, which might be worse for creatures born wild. She hesitated, then added, I'm required by law to report treating any large predator, especially one involved in a human encounter. Oliver looked at the sleeping cub, so vulnerable in its innocence. What if you didn't? Eleanor's hands stilled in the process of preparing an antibiotic injection. That would be illegal, Oliver. I could lose my license. We both could face charges. She knelt before my daughter, Eleanor. She took food from a baby's hand without hurting her. That's not a dangerous animal. That's something else. The veterinarian studied him for a long moment, her practical nature warring with the memory of what she'd witnessed in the grocery store. Finally, she returned to her preparation without another word, her silence neither agreement nor refusal. I need to get closer, she said eventually. The cub might see me as a threat. I'll handle the cub, Oliver decided, moving slowly toward the pair of bears. The cub woke as he approached, rising to its feet with a warning growl that seemed incongruously deep coming from such a small body. Oliver crouched, making himself smaller, less threatening. He spoke softly, nonsense words in a soothing tone, the same voice he used when Lily woke, frightened from a bad dream. To his amazement, the cub's growl subsided. It watched him warily but made no move to attack as he carefully, inch by inch, reached out his hand. The cub sniffed his fingers, then allowed Oliver to gently scratch behind its ears, a gesture of trust so profound it left him breathless. With the cub distracted, Eleanor moved in to treat the mother bear. The massive creature stirred at the sting of the first injection, but seemed to understand on some primal level that the humans were trying to help. She lay still as Eleanor cleaned the wound, her dark eyes finding Oliver's face as if drawing strength from his presence. I've done what I can, Eleanor said finally, packing bloody gauze into a biohazard bag. The rest is up to her strength and whatever higher power you believe in. Oliver nodded, still absently stroking the cub's rough fur. What now? Eleanor glanced at her watch, nearly 3 a.m. Now we leave her to rest. I'll come back tomorrow with more antibiotics. If she survives the night... She shrugged, unwilling to offer false hope. As they prepared to leave, the cub became agitated, moving between them and the mother bear with increasing distress. Oliver understood its dilemma. Stay with its injured mother, or follow the humans who had helped. We can't take the cub, Eleanor said, reading his thoughts. It needs to stay with its mother, whatever happens. Oliver knew she was right, but the thought of leaving the pair alone, vulnerable to predators, or the human who had already tried to kill them, felt wrong on a bone-deep level. He knelt beside the mother bear, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her massive body. We'll come back, he promised, unsure if she could understand, but needing to say the words anyway. Just hang on. As they turned to leave, Oliver's flashlight caught a flicker of movement in the trees at the clearing's edge. He froze, pointing the beam toward the disturbance. For an instant, he thought he saw a human figure watching them. Tall and lean, with the unmistakable shape of a rifle slung over one shoulder. Then it was gone, melting into the darkness beyond the light's reach. Did you see that? He whispered to Eleanor, who had also stopped, her body tense. Someone's out there, she confirmed softly. We need to go, now. They hurried back through the forest, the journey seeming much quicker in their haste to escape unseen eyes. Oliver's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Had they been followed? Was the shooter watching them, planning to return and finish what they'd started once the humans were gone? Eleanor parted from him at the edge of his property, heading to her own home with a promise to return at dawn. Oliver stood on his porch for a long moment after she left, scanning the dark tree line, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Inside, he checked on Lily, finding her still peacefully asleep, one tiny fist curled beside her cheek. The contrast between her absolute safety and the wounded mother bear lying exposed in the forest struck him like a physical blow. Oliver didn't bother trying to sleep. He made coffee, strong and black, and sat at his kitchen table with his grandfather's old shotgun across his lap, watching out the window as night gradually gave way to the gray light of dawn. A plan was forming in his mind. A plan so foolish, so potentially disastrous, that he couldn't bring himself to examine it too closely. But as the sun crested the eastern ridge, painting the kitchen in pale gold, Oliver knew with absolute certainty what he had to do. For the second time in 24 hours, Oliver Reed prepared to risk everything to save a mother and her child. The ringing of Oliver's phone jolted him from his thoughts. Lily had woken shortly after sunrise, and he'd been mechanically preparing her breakfast, while his mind raced through the logistics of his half-formed plan. He glanced at the screen. Sheriff Donovan. "Oliver," the sheriff said without preamble when he answered. "We need to talk. I'm hearing some disturbing rumors about last night." Oliver's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that say you were seen following a bear cub into the woods after midnight." The sheriff's voice was carefully neutral, but Oliver could hear the underlying concern. "Please tell me that's just small-town gossip." Oliver closed his eyes, cursing inwardly. Pine Hollow's rumor mill was legendary for its efficiency. "Who told you that? Doesn't matter. Is it true?" Lying would only complicate things. "Yes." A heavy sigh crackled through the connection. "I'm coming over. 20 minutes. The line went dead before Oliver could respond. He set the phone down, glancing at Lily, who sat in her high chair smearing oatmeal across her tray with enthusiastic concentration. What would happen to her if he was arrested for interfering with wildlife? Catherine's parents lived 3 states away. They'd take Lily, of course, but the thought of his daughter growing up without him twisted like a knife in his chest. Yet he couldn't ignore what he'd witnessed. The intelligence in the mother bear's eyes, the way she'd knelt before Lily, the cub's trust as it led him through the darkness. There was something profound in that connection, something that transcended the normal boundaries between human and wild. Sheriff Donovan's cruiser pulled up exactly 20 minutes later. Oliver watched through the window as the older man sat in his vehicle for a long moment, as if gathering his thoughts before approaching the cabin. When he finally climbed the porch steps, his weathered face was set in grim lines. "You look terrible," the sheriff said by way of greeting as Oliver opened the door. "Like you haven't slept." "I haven't." Oliver stepped back, allowing the sheriff to enter. "Coffee?" Donovan nodded, settling heavily at the kitchen table. He smiled at Lily, who babbled a greeting from her high chair, then turned serious eyes back to Oliver. "Start talking." Oliver did, relating everything that had happened since the bears left the grocery store. The cub's appearance on his porch, the discovery of the wounded mother bear, Dr. Walsh's treatment, the shadowy figure watching from the trees. The sheriff listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled with each revelation. "And you're certain it was a gunshot wound?" he asked when Oliver finished. "Eleanor confirmed it. Someone deliberately shot her after she left town." Sheriff Donovan sighed, rubbing a hand across his stubbled chin. "I think I know who. Garrett Hodge has been bragging at Miller's Tavern about taking care of the bear problem. I didn't put much stock in it. Garrett's prone to exaggeration. But if what you're saying is true..." "Hodge?" Oliver's hands clenched around his coffee mug. The hunting guide? The sheriff nodded grimly. He's been vocal about predator control since his cousin was injured in a black bear encounter last year. Man's got a vendetta. Will you arrest him? For shooting a bear that caused a public disturbance. Technically, he could claim it was a threat to the community. Donovan held up a hand to forestall Oliver's protest. I don't agree with him, Reed. I'm just telling you how it would play out legally. So, he gets away with it? And the bears, that depends on you. The sheriff leaned forward, lowering his voice even though they were alone in the cabin except for Lily. Officially, I should report the bear's location to Game and Wildlife. But what Eleanor did last night, treating the mother without reporting it, that bought you some time. Oliver studied the sheriff's face, hardly daring to hope. What are you saying? I'm saying that I saw something extraordinary in that grocery store yesterday. Something I can't explain. Donovan glanced at Lily, his expression softening. Your daughter connected with that bear in a way that defies everything I thought I knew about wild animals, and now you're telling me the cub sought you out, specifically for help. He shook his head slowly. I've been sheriff here for 30 years. I believe in rules and protocols, but sometimes the rule book doesn't account for miracles. Oliver's throat tightened. So you won't report them? Not today, Donovan said carefully. But the mother bear needs proper medical care or she'll die out there. And if Hodge is hunting her, she's not safe regardless. I've been thinking about that. Oliver hesitated, then plunged ahead. My grandfather's hunting cabin up on the North Ridge. It's isolated, stocked with supplies. If we could move her there. Transporting an injured adult bear? That's insane, Reed. Eleanor has tranquilizers. We could use my truck, get her to the cabin, let her heal where Hodge can't find her. The sheriff stared at him for a long moment. You're serious. Dead serious. Donovan drained his coffee, his expression unreadable. Let me think about it. In the meantime, stay put. Don't do anything stupid. After the sheriff left, Oliver called Eleanor to update her on the conversation. She arrived an hour later with a grim report. The mother bear was still alive, but weakening. Without proper medical intervention, she wouldn't survive much longer. The cub stays with her constantly, Eleanor added, her voice thick with emotion. It brings her water in its mouth, tries to make her eat berries it gathered. I've never seen anything like it. Oliver made his decision. We're moving her tonight. Sheriff Donovan might help, but even if he doesn't, I'm doing this. Eleanor looked alarmed. Oliver, that's crazy, I know. But I've thought it through. The hunting cabin has an old storage cellar. Dirt floor, reinforced walls, a separate entrance. She could recover there, protected from Hodge and anyone else who might want to harm her. And after she recovers, what then? Oliver had no answer. One step at a time, he told himself. Save her life first, worry about the future later. The hours crawled by as Oliver prepared. He called his neighbor to watch Lily for the night, claiming a family emergency. He drove to the hunting cabin to stock it with supplies, clean the cellar, ensure everything was ready. He collected tarps, ropes, anything that might help transport a creature weighing hundreds of pounds through rough terrain. As dusk approached, his phone rang. Sheriff Donovan. I've been thinking about your insane plan, the sheriff said without preamble, and against my better judgment I'm in. With conditions. Relief weakened Oliver's knees. Name them. 1. This stays between us, Eleanor, and one other person I trust, Deputy Marshal. 2. If at any point the bears show aggression, we end this immediately. 3. If the mother recovers, we alert Game and Wildlife for proper relocation. somewhere far from Hodge and his rifle. "Agreed," Oliver said immediately. "I must be losing my mind," Donovan muttered. "Meet us at the forest edge at midnight. And Reed, bring your rifle, just in case." The night was moonless, the forest a wall of absolute darkness beyond their flashlight beams. Oliver led the small group, Sheriff Donovan, Deputy Marshal, and Dr. Walsh, through the trees, following the path he'd memorized. The sheriff carried a tranquilizer rifle borrowed from Eleanor's clinic. Deputy Marshal and Oliver wrestled with a makeshift stretcher fashioned from a reinforced tarp and wooden poles. They found the bears exactly where Oliver had left them, though the mother's breathing had grown more labored. The cub greeted Oliver with what almost seemed like relief, pressing against his legs before returning to its mother's side. Eleanor administered the tranquilizer with practiced efficiency, her voice soothing as the dart found its mark. The mother bear barely reacted, too weak to fight the drug's swift effect. "She's lost a lot of blood," Eleanor reported grimly as they secured the massive animal to the stretcher. "Even with 4 of us, this won't be easy." It was an understatement. The journey back to Oliver's truck, parked on an old logging road half a mile away, became a grueling test of endurance. They had to stop every 100 yards to rest, their muscles screaming from the bear's weight. The cub followed anxiously, occasionally darting ahead as if to ensure the path was clear, then returning to check on its mother. Just as they reached the truck, a beam of light cut through the darkness ahead of them. Oliver froze, nearly dropping his end of the stretcher. Everyone extinguished their flashlights on instinct, plunging the forest into darkness. "Who's there?" a harsh voice called out. "I know someone's out there. I can hear you breathing." Sheriff Donovan motioned for everyone to remain still, then handed his portion of the stretcher to Deputy Marshal. Slowly, deliberately, he moved toward the voice, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "It's Sheriff Donovan, Garrett. What are you doing out here this time of night?" The beam of light swung wildly before settling on the sheriff's face. Behind it stood Garrett Hodge, a rifle cradled in his arms, his expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Could ask you the same thing, Sheriff," Hodge replied, his eyes narrowing as he tried to peer past Donovan into the darkness. "Heard rumors about bears causing trouble. Thought I'd do the community a service." "By poaching?" Donovan's voice hardened. "Because that mother bear you shot yesterday wasn't threatening anyone when you pulled the trigger, was it?" Hodge's face darkened. "That animal invaded the town, terrorized people. It's a danger that needs eliminating. That's not your call to make. Seems to me you're interfering with necessary predator control, Sheriff." Hodge shifted his rifle slightly. "Now, why don't you tell me what you're really doing out here?" Oliver saw the situation deteriorating rapidly. The mother bear would soon wake from the tranquilizer. They needed to move her immediately. He made a split-second decision, stepping forward into the beam of Hodge's flashlight. "It's my fault, Garrett," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I've been tracking the bears, trying to document them for research. The sheriff came out to warn me about the dangers." Hodge's eyes narrowed further. "Research? Since when are you a wildlife expert, Reed?" "Since yesterday," Oliver admitted. "When that mother bear knelt before my daughter instead of hurting her. That's not normal behavior, Garrett. It's worth studying, understanding." "It's worth a bullet is what it is," Hodge spat. "Wild animals don't belong near people." "This isn't just any wild animal," Eleanor interjected, joining them in the light. "The interaction between this bear and Oliver's daughter represents a potentially unprecedented form of cross-species communication. Killing her would be destroying a scientific phenomenon." Hodge hesitated, clearly not having expected to encounter the town veterinarian in the middle of the night. "You're all out here for a bear? This is crazy." "Maybe," Sheriff Donovan agreed calmly. "Or maybe it's something more important than any of us realize. Either way, Garrett, this is now an official investigation, and you're interfering." The standoff stretched into tense silence. Finally, Hodge lowered his rifle slightly. "Fine. Study your miracle bear. But when it mauls someone, and it will, that blood's on your hands, not mine." He turned and stomped away into the darkness, the beam of his flashlight bouncing among the trees until it disappeared completely. "He'll be back," Deputy Marshal warned quietly, "with friends and more guns." "Then we need to hurry," Oliver urged, returning to the stretcher. They loaded the unconscious bear into Oliver's truck with the last of their strength. The cub, after some coaxing from Oliver, reluctantly climbed into the cab of the truck, pressing itself against the passenger door as far from the humans as possible. The drive to the hunting cabin seemed endless, each bump in the road a potential disaster that might wake the tranquilized bear in the truck bed. When they finally arrived, they barely managed to transfer her to the cellar before she began showing signs of waking. "I'll stay with her tonight," Eleanor decided, setting up an IV drip of antibiotics and fluids. "The next 24 hours are critical." Sheriff Donovan nodded grimly. "Marshall and I will take shifts watching for Hodge. Reed, you get back to your daughter. We'll call if anything changes." Oliver hesitated, watching as the cub settled beside its mother in the dim cellar. The small bear had shown remarkable trust, following them without resistance, somehow understanding that these strange humans were trying to help. "Go," Eleanor urged him. "You've done everything you can for now." The next 3 days passed in an anxious blur. Oliver split his time between caring for Lily and visiting the cabin to check on the bears, always careful to ensure he wasn't followed. Eleanor reported cautious good news. The mother bear's condition was stabilizing, the wound showing signs of healing without infection. The cub had grown comfortable with their presence, even playing tentatively with toys Oliver brought, behaviors unheard of in wild bears. On the 4th night, as Oliver sat in the cellar reading aloud from one of Lily's storybooks, the cub seemed soothed by his voice. Sheriff Donovan arrived with grim news. "Hodge has organized a hunting party," he reported, keeping his voice low. 6 men, all armed, claiming they're going after problem bears in the area. They're starting at first light tomorrow. "They can't find this place," Oliver insisted. "It's too remote, unmarked on any maps." "Hodge is the best tracker in 3 counties, Donovan countered. "And he's determined. It's only a matter of time." The mother bear, who had been listening to their conversation with uncanny focus, suddenly rose to her feet. It was the first time she'd stood without assistance since the shooting, and both men stepped back in surprise. She swayed slightly but remained upright, her dark eyes fixed on Oliver with unmistakable intelligence. Then, to their astonishment, she limped to the cellar entrance and pawed at the door. "She wants to leave," Oliver realized aloud. "She's not strong enough," Eleanor protested from where she'd been changing the bear's bandages. "The wound could reopen. She needs at least another week of treatment." The mother bear turned to Eleanor, then back to Oliver, her gaze so direct, so pointedly communicative, that it sent chills down his spine. The cub pressed against its mother's leg, mirroring her apparent urgency. "I think she knows they're coming," Oliver said softly. "She wants to protect her cub." Sheriff Donovan frowned. "Reed, you're talking about this animal like it can understand English." "Maybe not the words," Oliver conceded, "but the meaning? The danger? Yes, I think she understands." He approached the mother bear carefully, stopping just out of reach. "You want to leave," he said directly to her. But where will you go? Hodge will find you. You're still too weak to travel far." The bear made a soft chuffing sound, then nudged her cub toward Oliver. The young bear came willingly, pressing its head against Oliver's hand in a gesture that seemed almost deliberate. A wild, impossible thought formed in Oliver's mind. "You want me to take the cub?" Eleanor gasped. "Oliver, you can't be serious. That's a wild animal, not a pet." "I don't think she's asking for adoption," Oliver said slowly, trying to understand the communication taking place. "I think she's asking for safety, for protection, until she can return." He turned to Sheriff Donovan, whose expression reflected equal parts skepticism and wonder. "What if we let her go? Let her lead Hodge away from here. Away from her cub. She's strong enough for that now. We keep the cub safe until she returns, or until we can arrange proper sanctuary for both of them." "This is insane," Donovan muttered, but his objection lacked conviction. "Completely against protocol." "Nothing about this has followed protocol from the beginning," Oliver pointed out. "From the moment she walked into that grocery store, we've been in uncharted territory." Eleanor shook her head in disbelief, but began gathering her medical supplies. "If we're really doing this, she needs one more dose of antibiotics before she goes." The decision made, they worked quickly. Eleanor administered the medication. Oliver gathered food the mother bear could take with her: fish from the cabin's freezer, berries he'd collected from the surrounding forest. Sheriff Donovan reluctantly agreed to create a diversion that would draw Hodge's hunting party in the wrong direction, at least initially. As dawn approached, they stood at the cellar entrance, watching as the mother bear prepared to leave. She nuzzled her cub one last time, a gesture so tender it brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Then she turned to Oliver, approaching him without fear. Time seemed to stop as man and bear regarded each other, separated by species and language, but connected by something deeper, a mutual understanding of what it meant to be a parent, to protect at all costs. Slowly, deliberately, the mother bear lowered her massive head in what could only be interpreted as a bow. Oliver returned the gesture, bending at the waist as he had seen her do in the grocery store. "I'll keep your child safe," he promised, his voice thick with emotion, "until you return." With that, the mother bear turned and limped into the forest, her dark form quickly swallowed by the pre-dawn shadows. The cub watched her go, making a soft, mournful sound, but making no move to follow. What followed was a week unlike any in Pine Hollow's history. Reports of bear sightings came from all corners of the county, always just glimpses. A shadow at the forest edge, paw prints by a stream, disturbed berry bushes. Hodge and his hunting party returned day after day with nothing to show for their efforts but exhaustion and frustration. Meanwhile, the bear cub remained at the hunting cabin, cared for in shifts by Oliver, Eleanor, and, surprisingly, Sheriff Donovan, who found himself increasingly invested in what he called the most extraordinary situation of my career. The cub's behavior continued to defy all expectations of a wild animal. It played with toys, responded to simple commands, even seemed to understand when they spoke about its mother. Oliver brought Lily to meet the cub under Eleanor's careful supervision. The connection between child and bear was immediate and profound. Lily babbled happily, offering her toys to her new friend without hesitation. The cub, gentle despite its growing strength, treated the baby with careful deference, as if recognizing her vulnerability. "It's like they have their own language," Eleanor observed, watching the unlikely playmates, "something we've forgotten how to speak." On the 8th night, as Oliver sat on the cabin porch with the cub dozing beside him, a familiar figure emerged from the darkness. The mother bear, moving with greater strength than when she'd left, her wound clearly healing well. The cub sprang to its feet with a cry of recognition, bounding down the steps to reunite with its mother in a joyful tangle of fur and affection. Oliver watched, his heart full, as the bears communicated in their own way, nuzzling, soft vocalizations, subtle body language. Then, to his amazement, the mother bear approached the porch steps, the cub following close behind. She regarded Oliver for a long moment, her eyes reflecting starlight. Understanding dawned. "You're leaving for good," he said softly. The mother bear made a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated in Oliver's chest. She turned to look at the mountains to the north, wilderness areas too remote for hunters, too rugged for casual exploration. "I understand," Oliver nodded. "It's safer there, for both of you." He descended the steps slowly, stopping a respectful distance from the bears. From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden figure he'd carved during his vigils, a tiny bear meticulously detailed. He placed it on the ground between them, a token of remembrance. The mother bear studied it, then looked back at Oliver. In that gaze was a complexity of emotion that transcended species, gratitude, recognition, farewell. She lowered her head in that now familiar gesture of respect. This time, Oliver knelt completely, mirroring her posture. "Thank you," he whispered, "for trusting us, for showing us there's more to this world than we understand." The cub approached him one last time, pressing its muzzle briefly against his hand. A goodbye, a blessing. Then both bears turned and walked into the darkness, their forms gradually fading until only the night remained. 5 years later, Oliver stood at the edge of his yard, watching as Lily, now a spirited 6-year-old, chased fireflies in the summer twilight. The legend of the bears of Pine Hollow had grown with each retelling, becoming part of local folklore. Some believed it, some dismissed it as fantasy, but all agreed it had changed the town. Wildlife conservation efforts had flourished. Pine Hollow now boasted the region's premier bear sanctuary, with Eleanor Walsh as its director. Garrett Hodge had eventually left town, unable to live down his role as the villain in a story that had captured national attention after Sheriff Donovan finally shared it with the press. The hunting cabin had become an educational center where children learned about coexistence with wildlife. Most experts had explained away the bears' behavior as anomalies, stress responses, unusual habituation. But Oliver, Eleanor, and those who had witnessed it firsthand knew better. Something profound had occurred in that grocery store, something that challenged the boundaries humans had drawn between themselves and the natural world. As darkness settled over the mountains, Lily ran to her father's side, pointing excitedly toward the forest edge. "Dad, look!" Oliver followed her gaze, his breath catching in his throat. There, just visible in the deepening shadows, stood 2 bears, one massive, the other smaller but strong, watching from a distance. Around the larger bear's neck hung something that caught the last light of day, a simple leather cord from which dangled a tiny wooden carving. "Is that them?" Lily whispered, her small hand finding Oliver's. "I think it might be," Oliver answered softly, his voice thick with emotion. The bears remained for only a moment longer before melting back into the forest, leaving father and daughter standing hand in hand, witnesses to a miracle that had bridged 2 worlds. In the years that followed, similar stories began to emerge from across the country, tales of unexpected connections between humans and wild creatures, moments of understanding that defied explanation. Scientists studied them, skeptics dismissed them, but those who had experienced such connections recognized them for what they were, reminders that the divide between human and animal was perhaps not as vast as humanity had believed. and in Pine Hollow, on certain quiet nights when the moon was high. People sometimes reported seeing a mother bear and her growing cub at the forest's edge, watching over the town that had once feared them, now guardian spirits of a place where, for one extraordinary moment, a baby's innocence had brought a wild creature to its knees in silent recognition of something ancient and shared. Something like kinship, something like love,